Off the northern tip of Scotland lies a small cluster of islands that, at first glance, might seem quiet and unremarkable. Orkney covers less than 1,000 square miles and is home to fewer than 23,000 people. But if you start peeling back the layers of time, you'll find that these islands hold one of the richest histories in the world. Thousands of years ago, Orkney was the heart of a Neolithic culture that outshone much of ancient Europe. Long before the Great Pyramids rose in Egypt, people here were building grand stone circles, barrows, and vast temple complexes that would leave even the most advanced civilizations in awe. But the most incredible relic from this ancient world? That's Skara Brae. Built around 3100 BC, this ancient settlement was hidden beneath layers of sand and earth for over 4,000 years. When a powerful storm in 1850 stripped away the layers of earth that had buried it, what emerged was a perfectly preserved glimpse into the distant past. Skara Brae was so well preserved that walking through its stone houses felt like stepping straight into the lives of people who lived thousands of years ago. But who built this village? Why did they choose this spot on Orkney's wild, windswept coast? And how did Skara Brae fit into the larger story of Neolithic Orkney? To answer those questions, we need to go back even further. Around 3700 BC, the first Neolithic farmers arrived on Orkney. They sailed across the treacherous waters of Pentland Firth, bringing with them animals like pigs and cows, along with seeds, tools, and everything else they needed to build a new life. When they landed on Orkney, they must have felt like they'd stumbled into paradise. While you might think that the northern tip of Scotland would be cold and bleak, Orkney's climate was surprisingly mild back then. The islands were lush and green, with fertile soil perfect for farming. But there was one big challenge. There weren't many trees. Unlike other parts of the British Isles where wood was used to build houses, Orkney's settlers had to get creative. The constant winds had stripped the islands of most of their trees, leaving them with little timber to work with, so they turned to stone. This decision would prove to be a gift for future generations. While wooden structures rot and disappear over time, stone lasts. And because these early settlers built their homes from stone, we're able to see their villages today, almost exactly as they were 5,000 years ago. The first stone farmhouse on Orkney was the Knap of Howard, built around 3600 BC. To put that in perspective, this house is older than Stonehenge. In fact, by the time Stonehenge was built, the Knap of Howard was already ancient history. And the people who built it weren't stopping there. Over the next few centuries, Orkney's Neolithic culture flourished. They built temples, like the massive Ness of Brodgar complex, and raised towering stone circles that rivaled anything in Europe. But it was around 3100 BC that they began work on their most famous creation, Skara Brae. Now, you might think of Skara Brae as just a bunch of old stone houses, but it was much more than that. The entire village was built inside a large mound called a midden. And what's a midden, you might ask? Well, it's basically a giant pile of trash. Seriously, the mound was made from a mix of dung, compost, broken bones, and random stones. But don't wrinkle your nose just yet. This wasn't some prehistoric garbage dump. The midden served a very important purpose. It insulated the houses, protecting them from Orkney's harsh Atlantic winds. It kept the homes warm in winter and cool in summer, creating a surprisingly comfortable living environment. Inside Skara Brae, life was close-knit and communal. This wasn't like most Neolithic settlements, where people lived in separate farmsteads spread out across the land. Skara Brae had 8 houses, all clustered tightly together, connected by narrow, winding passages. It was home to around 50 to 100 people, which might not sound like much today, but back then it was a bustling little village. Entering Skara Brae wouldn't have been like walking into any modern neighborhood. There was only one way in, a single narrow passage that you had to stoop to enter. Once inside, you'd find yourself in a maze of dark, twisting corridors. It would have been disorienting at first, but as you made your way through, you'd start to notice the flicker of firelight coming from the individual homes. Each house was its own little world. The walls were made of thick stone, and the ceilings, which haven't survived, were likely made of turf supported by wooden beams, or even whale bones. Inside, you'd find stone furniture, beds, shelves, and cupboards, all carved directly into the walls. The beds were lined with soft materials like heather and animal skins, making them surprisingly cozy. And above the hearth, You might see a fish hanging from the ceiling, slowly being smoked and cured by the fire. But what's really incredible is that Skara Brae had plumbing. Yes, you heard that right. 5,000 years ago, these people had rudimentary drainage systems and even indoor toilets. Think about that! The folks at Skara Brae were enjoying the luxury of indoor plumbing, while people in Britain were still using chamber pots well into the 19th century. Life in Skara Brae wasn't all hard work either. Archaeologists have found evidence of art carved into the stone walls, suggesting that the villagers had leisure time to create and express themselves. Their diet was also varied and rich. They farmed crops, raised cattle and sheep, and hunted seals and deer. They even gathered shellfish and cultivated limpets in small waterproof tanks built into their homes. There's even some evidence suggesting they might have feasted on beached whales from time to time. But life wasn't perfect. While Skara Brae seemed like an advanced and thriving community, it was still a tough place to live. The people suffered from arthritis and other ailments caused by hard physical labor. Their life expectancy was shockingly low. Most people didn't live past their 30s, and children didn't survive into adulthood. If you made it to 50, you were considered ancient. Yet, despite these hardships, there's no evidence that Skara Brae ever experienced violence or warfare. No weapons have ever been found at the site, and there are no signs that the villagers feared attacks from their neighbors. It seems like this little community on the edge of the world lived in relative peace, but that doesn't mean there weren't mysteries. One of the biggest puzzles is House 7. Unlike the other homes, House 7 has a door that could only be locked from the outside. What was it used for? Was it a prison? A place for rituals? Maybe it was a quarantine house for the sick. We may never know. Eventually, around 2500 BC, Skara Brae was abandoned. Some theories suggest that a massive storm or climate change drove the villagers away, while others believe that rising sea levels may have swallowed the land around them. Whatever the reason, the people of Skara Brae left, and their village was buried under the sands, hidden from the world for thousands of years. When it was finally uncovered in 1850, Skara Brae changed everything we thought we knew about ancient Scotland. It showed us that Neolithic people weren't just primitive farmers. They were builders, artists, and innovators. Skara Brae remains one of the best preserved ancient sites in the world, a window into a time long gone, but not forgotten. But how did Skara Brae connect to the larger Neolithic world of Orkney? And what does this ancient village tell us about the people who called these islands home 5,000 years ago? Back in the Neolithic period, Orkney was home to about 10,000 people. That's a huge number for the time, especially when most villages elsewhere had maybe 50 to 100 people. Artifacts from Orkney, like pottery and monument designs, have been found all over Britain. This wasn't an isolated island. It was a center of culture and innovation. Some even believe that Orkney was where henges, those massive stone circles, were first invented. And yes, that includes Stonehenge. While Stonehenge might be the most famous, it likely took its inspiration from the earlier monuments in Orkney. But if you really want to understand how Skara Brae fit into this world, you need to look at the massive structures surrounding it. In 1999, UNESCO named Skara Brae part of a World Heritage Site called the Heart of Neolithic Orkney. But the village was just one piece of a much bigger story. Nearby were incredible monuments, huge stone circles, burial tombs, and even a massive temple complex. And the people of Skara Brae would have been deeply connected to all of them. Let's start with the standing stones of Stennis, built around 3000 BC. These towering stones, some nearly 20 feet tall, formed a massive circle not far from Skara Brae. Archaeologists have found the same style of pottery at both sites, showing that the villagers were likely involved in building or using these monuments. And given their size, these weren't the kind of structures a single village could pull off. They required teamwork from communities across Orkney. Then there's Maeshowe, a giant burial cairn built around 2800 BC. It's perfectly aligned with the winter solstice, so once a year, the sun's rays would shine directly into its heart. For the people of Skara Brae, this would have been a powerful event, reminding them of life cycles, of death and rebirth. It's easy to imagine how these monuments shape their daily lives and beliefs. But the most mind-blowing structure of all, that would be Ness of Brodgar. Discovered in 2002, the Ness of Brodgar is one of the biggest archaeological finds in Scottish history. It's a huge temple complex filled with buildings and artwork that even predates Skara Brae. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was the heart of a culture, a gathering spot for people from across the islands. And it just sat a short distance from Skara Brae, dominating the landscape. For centuries, the villagers of Skara Brae lived in the shadow of these massive monuments. They grew up seeing them on the horizon, likely visiting them for ceremonies or gatherings. We don't know exactly what these sites meant to them, but their presence would have shaped how these villagers saw the world and their place in it. But even as these monuments stood strong, Skara Brae's story was drawing to a close. Unlike many ancient sites that ended in war or disaster, Skara Brae seemed to have faded away quietly. There's no evidence of violence, no signs of sudden destruction. Instead, the village was slowly abandoned over time. Why? Well, one theory is that as Orkney's society became more complex and centered around these grand monuments, people started moving to other places. Maybe they were drawn to larger communities or new opportunities. Maybe younger generations wanted something different. Whatever the reason, by around 2500 BC, Skara Brae was empty. The sand, always part of life on these islands, began to take over. Without people to sweep it away, the village was buried, hidden from the world for thousands of years. But while Skara Brae disappeared quietly, the wider culture of Orkney met a much more dramatic end. About 200 years after Skara Brae was buried, the people of Orkney gather for one final massive event at the Ness of Brodgar. Archaeologists have found evidence that on a single day, hundreds of cattle were herded into the temple complex and slaughtered in an enormous feast. Thousands of people would have been there, celebrating, eating, and marking the end of an era. And then, something strange happened. After the feast, the people didn't leave the temple standing. Instead, they took their tools and deliberately destroyed it. They smashed the walls, buried the ruins under rubble, and walked away. The culture that had built some of the greatest monuments in prehistoric Europe was gone. Why did they do this? Was it a ritual, a symbolic ending? We don't know. But this final act marked the end of Orkney's Neolithic Golden Age. For thousands of years, Skara Brae lay hidden beneath the sand, its story forgotten. But when it was rediscovered in the 19th century, it changed everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Today, Skara Brae isn't just a glimpse into the past. It's a reminder of the people who lived, worked, and dreamed on these islands 5,000 years ago. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Skara Brae and Orkney's ancient history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.